Most men don't fail with women because they're not good enough. They fail because they do too much of the wrong things. Today, we're going to solve the silent problem that makes women lose respect even when you have good intentions. Most men are never told this truth early enough, and because of that, they slowly trade their self-respect for approval without even realizing it. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly. One cancelled plan here. One ignored boundary there. One moment where you stay silent instead of speaking up because you're afraid of how she might react. And before you know it, you're no longer choosing her, you're orbiting her. Here's the psychological problem we're solving today. When a man starts living for a woman instead of living from himself, attraction doesn't grow, it collapses. Not because she is cruel, but because the human psyche is wired to respect strength, direction, and emotional stability. When your sense of worth depends on how she feels about you, you unknowingly tell her that you don't feel secure within yourself. Think about this deeply. A man with self-respect moves with intention. He has values. He has limits. He has a life that existed before her and will continue whether she stays or goes. That doesn't make him cold. It makes him grounded. But when you abandon that foundation just to keep her happy, you don't become more lovable. You become predictable, and predictability without depth breeds boredom at a subconscious level. Many men believe sacrifice is love, so they sacrifice their goals, their routines, their friendships, their principles. They say yes when they mean no. They agree just to avoid conflict. They prioritize her emotions while neglecting their own. And slowly their identity dissolves. The problem is not that you care too much. The problem is that you care without caring for yourself first. The female subconscious doesn't respond to a man who bends endlessly. It responds to a man who stands firmly but calmly. When you drop everything for her, you send a silent message. My life has no structure without you. And structure is safety. Direction is safety. A man without direction feels emotionally unstable, even if he's kind, even if he's loyal, even if his intentions are pure. Notice how respect changes when a man stops honoring himself. She may not say anything. She may not even understand it consciously. But the energy shifts, her tone changes. Her effort decreases. Her attraction becomes inconsistent. And the man is left confused, asking himself why doing more is getting him less. The answer lies in psychology, not effort. Self-respect is not arrogance, it's alignment. It's the ability to say, this is who I am, and I won't disappear to be chosen. When a man keeps his purpose at the center of his life, a woman doesn't feel neglected. She feels invited into something solid. But when he abandons that purpose, he places emotional weight on her that she never asked to carry. Here's the uncomfortable truth. No woman wants to be the reason a man stopped growing. Because deep down, she knows that if he can abandon himself for love, he can also lose himself in resentment later. Stability isn't proven by how much you give. It's proven by how much you can give without losing your core. A man with self-respect doesn't chase. He doesn't cling. He chooses. And that choice is what creates attraction at the deepest psychological level. There is a silent mistake that destroys attraction faster than rejection ever could. And most men make it thinking they are doing the right thing. Over-explaining. Justifying. Defending every action as if being misunderstood is a threat to survival. The psychological problem we're solving here is simple but brutal. When a man feels the need to constantly explain himself, he communicates insecurity before he communicates logic. Think about how the human mind processes confidence. Confidence is felt, not proven. The moment you start adding excessive words to defend a simple decision, your nervous system is speaking louder than your mouth. You're not explaining because clarity is required. You're explaining because you're afraid of disapproval. And fear always leaks through tone, timing, and energy. A man who knows himself doesn't rush to be understood. He doesn't panic when there's silence. He doesn't feel the need to convince anyone that his boundaries are reasonable. He states them calmly and allows the other person to respond however they choose. But when you over-explain, you're subconsciously asking for permission. Permission to exist as you are. Permission to decide. Permission to say no. This is where attraction quietly dies. Not in disagreement, not in conflict, but in the imbalance of power created when one person is constantly justifying their right to their own choices. Over-explaining tells her that her reaction determines your emotional stability. It places her in a position of judgment rather than connection. Many men think explaining more will create understanding. But psychologically, too much explanation creates doubt. It raises unspoken questions in her mind. Why is he nervous? Why does he need to defend this so intensely? What is he afraid of losing? And once those questions exist, respect begins to erode. There's a deeper layer here that most people miss. Over-explaining is often rooted in childhood conditioning. Somewhere in the past, you learned that being accepted required proving your intentions, that being calm wasn't enough, that you had to earn understanding. But adult attraction doesn't operate on childhood survival strategies. It operates on emotional self-trust. When a man trusts himself, his words are clean, simple, direct. He doesn't narrate his inner turmoil. He doesn't flood the moment with reasons and emotional disclaimers. He lets his actions speak and his silence hold weight. And silence, when it comes from self-assurance, is powerful. Notice how different it feels when someone explains because they want to share versus when they explain because they need approval. One feels grounded, the other feels needy. Women are exceptionally sensitive to this distinction. Even if they can't articulate it, they feel the energy before they process the content. When you justify your boundaries, you weaken them. When you apologize for your standards, you shrink them. When you explain your decisions as if they are open for debate, you teach others to question your authority over your own life. This isn't about being rude or emotionally closed. It's about being internally settled. A man who stops over-explaining doesn't become cold, he becomes clear. And clarity creates safety. Safety creates attraction. Because a woman doesn't want to manage your emotions or validate your decisions. She wants to feel that you can stand in who you are without needing constant reassurance. The moment you stop explaining yourself to be accepted, you start being felt instead of evaluated. There is a hunger that hides beneath polite behavior, compliments, and constant availability, and most men don't realize they're feeding it every time they look to a woman for validation. The problem we're addressing here is not affection, it's dependence. When your emotional stability starts depending on how she responds, how fast she replies, or how warmly she reacts, you quietly hand over control of your self-worth. Validation feels good in the moment, a smile, a compliment, attention. It gives your nervous system a hit of reassurance, but the psyche quickly adapts, and what once felt like appreciation becomes a requirement. You stop enjoying her interest and start needing it, and need is where attraction starts to suffocate. Chasing validation doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it looks like constantly seeking reassurance that everything is okay. Sometimes it looks like changing your opinions to match hers. Sometimes it looks like over-giving, hoping your effort will be noticed and rewarded emotionally. But underneath all of it is the same message being sent at a subconscious level. I don't feel whole unless you approve of me. This creates an invisible imbalance. She becomes the evaluator. You become the performer. And no matter how kind or patient she is, that dynamic erodes desire because attraction requires polarity, not emotional dependence. A woman doesn't want to feel like the source of your confidence. She wants to feel your confidence before she ever enters your world. The mind reads validation seeking as insecurity, even when the behavior is gentle or well-intentioned. Compliments begin to feel transactional. Kindness starts to feel strategic. Presence starts to feel anxious. She may not be able to explain why the energy feels off, but she feels it. Humans are wired to sense when someone's sense of self is externally anchored. There's also a deeper psychological tension here. When you chase validation, you give her emotional responsibility she never agreed to carry. Your mood rises when she engages and drops when she pulls back. Your certainty depends on her reactions. And that weight creates pressure, not closeness. Emotional safety doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being chosen by someone who is already stable on their own. Men often confuse validation with connection. They think if she affirms them enough, they'll finally feel secure, but security doesn't come from being approved of. It comes from approving of yourself. The more you outsource that approval, the weaker your internal foundation becomes. And without a solid foundation, attraction has nothing to rest on. A man who doesn't chase validation moves differently. His presence is calm. His interest is clear but not desperate. He doesn't fish for reassurance because he already knows who he is. When he gives affection, it's an expression, not a request, and that difference is felt immediately. The irony is that the less you need validation, the more naturally it comes. Not because you're manipulating outcomes, but because your energy shifts from consumption to contribution. You're no longer trying to extract worth from her reactions. You're simply sharing yourself from a place of fullness. When a man stops asking a woman to confirm his value, he stops shrinking himself around her emotions. He doesn't walk on eggshells. He doesn't panic at distance. He doesn't interpret every shift in tone as a threat. He stays rooted, steady, and emotionally self-contained. And that stability changes the entire dynamic, because attraction grows in the space where confidence exists without permission. There is a dangerous lie many men tell themselves when they tolerate disrespect, And that lie sounds like maturity. It sounds like patience. It sounds like emotional intelligence. But beneath the surface, it is fear of loss. The psychological problem we're confronting here is this: when you accept disrespect to keep a woman, you teach her, without words, that your boundaries are negotiable and your self-worth is conditional. Disrespect rarely begins loudly. It starts small, a dismissive tone, a sarcastic comment, a boundary crossed and then laughed off. And in that moment you have a choice. Speak. Many men choose silence because they don't want conflict. They don't want to seem insecure. They don't want to risk pushing her away. But silence doesn't create peace, it creates permission. The human psyche learns through patterns, not promises. When disrespect is met with tolerance, it becomes normalized. And once something is normalized, it escalates. Not necessarily because she intends harm, but because the subconscious mind tests limits. If nothing pushes back, the line keeps moving. And the more you endure, the less you are seen as someone who must be respected. There is a profound difference between emotional control and emotional suppression. Emotional control comes from inner strength. Emotional suppression comes from fear. When you swallow discomfort instead of addressing it, you are not being calm. You are being absent from your own experience, and absence is felt. It creates a quiet resentment that leaks out in other ways: withdrawal, passive aggression, emotional distance. Respect is not maintained by being agreeable. It is maintained by being clear. A man who values himself doesn't raise his voice or threaten. He simply doesn't allow behavior that diminishes him. He addresses it in real time with composure. And if it continues, he creates distance. Not as punishment, but as alignment with his standards. Many men believe that if they show they can endure anything, they will be valued more. In reality, endurance without boundaries signals low self-regard. It tells the subconscious mind that you fear being alone more than being disrespected. And that fear shifts the power dynamic. The relationship becomes less about mutual respect and more about emotional control. A woman cannot respect a man who doesn't respect himself. This isn't cruelty, it's psychology. Respect begins internally and radiates outward through behavior. When you excuse poor treatment, you undermine your own authority over your life. You teach others how to treat you by what you tolerate, not by what you demand. There's also an unspoken emotional burden placed on her when you tolerate disrespect. She may feel less safe, not more. Because if you can't protect your own boundaries, how will you protect the relationship? Stability isn't about being endlessly patient. It's about being consistently grounded. A man who refuses disrespect isn't rigid or controlling. He's stable, he's predictable in his values. And predictability in values creates trust. When your standards are clear and enforced, the relationship either rises to meet them or reveals its incompatibility. Both outcomes protect your dignity. When you choose self-respect over comfort, you don't lose connection, you lose illusion. And illusion is often what keeps men trapped in dynamics that slowly erode their sense of self. Real connection begins where fear ends and self-worth stands firm. Everything you've just heard points to one truth most men are never taught. Attraction is not created by doing more, giving more, or enduring more. It's created by being rooted in who you are. The moment you abandon yourself for approval, over-explain to be accepted, chase validation to feel worthy, or tolerate disrespect to avoid loss, you step out of alignment with your own power. This isn't about becoming cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. It's about becoming internally stable. A man who respects himself doesn't need to perform, convince, or sacrifice his identity to be chosen. He chooses himself first, and that choice reshapes every interaction he has with women. When your purpose comes before attachment, your words carry weight. When you stop seeking validation, your presence becomes calm. When you protect your boundaries, respect follows naturally. And when you stop trying to save or fix someone, you allow relationships to form from wholeness instead of need. The deeper psychology is simple. People don't fall for effort, they respond to energy. And energy is shaped by how you see yourself when no one is watching. The more you stand firm in your values, the less you need to control outcomes. You stop casing connection and start allowing it. At that point, relationships stop being a test of worth and start becoming a reflection of it.